have the CLE session and no problem to record. And so we're here today to talk about hemp. And I think the reason I was invited back is because as we were discussing marijuana and cannabis, I had to explain how our government and certain other international governments are treating hemp differently than marijuana. So that is what we will cover today. Let me just provide a quick introduction. I am Eric Berlin. I lead the cannabis sector group, both US and globally, here at Denton's. I sit in Chicago, but oversee that. I have been a lawyer now for 32 years and in the cannabis space for about 17 years. I was the lawyer who helped draft and get passed the Illinois medical cannabis law, and then I have been involved in various other states and federally. And in some would consider me the sort of dean of the cannabis bar, but I say that in a way of a confession to the introduction to our subject, that even as I was as involved as I've been for all those years, I did not see or predict that hemp and hemp products would become so large and such a large part of my practice, and that other lawyers are getting so many questions about it. So let's talk a little bit of our agenda for today. The first thing I'm going to discuss is what is hemp? What is it legally and biologically compared or contrasted with cannabis? And what sort of products are we seeing from hemp, which is not just rope, but what I'm talking about is ingestible products that really are very similar to the cannabis products that are sold on the regulated market. And just to discuss what does that market look like now, and it is shockingly large is what I would say. So next we'll discuss what is federal law, and some of this is combined in between, but what is federal law and what happened in the 2018 Farm Bill that led to this consumable hemp product industry. And I apologize, I've been talking all morning and I'm going to need to drink a little bit of water while I'm talking today, so I apologize for that. The next thing we'll discuss will be the state regulatory landscape. I was having a conversation with the Deputy Attorney General for NASDAQ, and we were discussing cannabis and we were discussing hemp. And he said, oh my gosh, so you and your team have to, it's not just 50 different laws for cannabis, it's also 50 different laws for hemp. How do you all sleep? So that is true. It really is now different laws for cannabis and hemp, which we'll discuss. And then we'll discuss the possible changes in law, both at the federal level and at the state level. And we will absolutely make time for Q&A. And if there's really sort of an urgent question that we need for clarification, please put it in the chat box and I'll monitor that as we go along. And I will leave time for questions and my answers as well, and discussion. So let's start here. What on earth is cannabis? Let's make clear, cannabis is a plant. And whether it's meets the definition of weed or whatever that is really beside the point. It's a plant that can be very invasive, meaning it can adapt to different environments and grow in those different environments. It is the plant Cannabis sativa L, which is a plant, a genus. And when we refer to cannabis, or by its slang, marijuana, we're referring also to the extracts from the glands on the flowers, which I'm actually showing in the photograph there, and the leaves containing the cannabinoids. And when I refer to cannabinoids, and I described this a little bit previously, These are the molecules that can be found in cannabis, like THC, CBD, CBN, which is very popular to help people sleep. Those are all contained in the cannabis plant and extracted and then put in products from the cannabis plant. And cannabis is, I don't want to say unique in the sense that it is the only plant on earth that produces these molecules that have already been found to have medicinal effect, but it is the one that produces them robustly. And I should add, when we're talking about cannabis, we're not just talking about cannabinoids. We're talking about terpenes and flavonoids and other molecules. And in my practice, and we're talking about hemp ingestibles here, but there are also hemp medicines. And so I have a client right now that is producing basically hemp derived medicine. So it does not contain cannabinoids other in trace amounts. It's much more the terpenes, the flavonoids, and the other components that are then being sent to trial programs in other countries. So I just say that this plant is vastly complicated. It has well over 100 different cannabinoids, which integrate into our own human endocannabinoid system in different ways. The fact that we are now dividing it into different components is not a basis of biology or nature or even chemistry. These are legal distinctions. So I want to be clear when I'm talking about hemp or I'm talking about cannabis or marijuana, all of that is cannabis. So I today will use the slang term and the term that's in the Controlled Substances Act of marijuana. But to be clear, marijuana and hemp are all really the same and they're all part of cannabis. But our government, and I'm going to get to this in a minute, but our government has divided this plant by saying if the plant or its extracts contain more than 0.3% delta 9 THC, it's marijuana. If it has that or less, it's hemp. Now, what ends up happening before I get into the legal wording of this and everything that comes forward from that, let's be clear that as it's divided by our government, the thought was that hemp was less than 0.3% THC. I should say by dry weight is included. It'll be loosely regulated, non-impairing, non-intoxicating. You can tell the difference because hemp grows really tall and is just more fibrous. And it will be fully legal and lead to textiles and biofuels. And yes, we'll extract CBD from it. And marijuana would continue to be marijuana. And if you're all in Illinois, you have ready access to regulated dispensaries in Illinois, and you can go in or you can go online and see they have all sorts of products that come from this. They come from the marijuana side. You have loose flower, you have joints, you have vapes, cartridges, edibles, drinks, patches, suppositories, pills, sublinguals. All that is produced with marijuana and put on the market as part of the regulated marijuana program here in Illinois. So that's what was conceived by the federal government as the distinction between marijuana, which would continue to be a controlled substance, and it still remains Schedule 1, versus hemp. And let me just talk for a moment about how our government drew that distinction. And I want to reiterate this point. This distinction of 0.3% on a dry weight basis has no basis in nature, biology, or chemistry. It is man-made. It is legislatively made. And anytime you're legislating a plant, you kind of get the corollary of a lesson of don't fool with Mother Nature. And that is really what we're going to be talking about today, is how this language that I put in front of you that people refer to as the 2018 Farm Bill loophole has led to a multi-billion-dollar industry of products that are very similar to the ones that are being sold on the regulated market. And I'm going to get to that as well. So let's just be clear about what the definition is. The definition drew up by Congress and signed into law in 2018 separated hemp and said hemp will no longer be a controlled substance, and it'll be defined as the plant and any part of the plant, including seeds and derivatives, extracts, cannabinoids, isomers, the acids. I don't want to go too deep into the chemistry to talk about what these are and how they're connected, but they're all part of the cannabis plant. And they're saying all that with a delta 9 THC concentration of no greater than 0.3% on a dry weight basis from henceforth shall be deemed hemp and will no longer be a controlled substance. The reason that was put into law was the thought that hemp is a very great textile and there could be an enormous market for that. And the recognition of, quite frankly, what President Trump sent out a Truth Social post a couple of weeks ago, that CBD, which is another cannabinoid found in marijuana and found in greater quantities in hemp, is a powerful pharmaceutical agent that is an anti-inflammatory and helps with certain diseases and conditions that afflict the elderly in particular. And so it's potent medicine. And the federal government wanted to allow that market to proceed. What we end up with is, let me just back up a step, with the CBD coming to market. So as we discussed last time, and I'll reiterate today, the cannabis plant, including hemp, contain all sorts of different cannabinoids that have different effects on our body. And I've referenced delta 9 THC. That is the main molecule that is the intoxicant. That's the one that gets you high. Not only, but it's part of it. And so right after the federal government basically legalized hemp, the FDA said, hey, not so quick. We think that putting THC in ingestible products is problematic for a few reasons. And they were particularly focused on CBD at the time, but they mentioned THC as well. So it was focused on CBD. A lot of producers of CBD weren't sure how to go to market. And inventive chemists figured out that you could alter CBD and basically change it to delta 9 THC and then just move a bond and change it to delta 8 THC, which has been referred to as THC light. It is an intoxicant. It can get you high, but it's less powerful than delta 9. It is found in the cannabis plant, but in very, very small amounts. And this part was not anticipated, that there would be conversion to other molecules, and the final product would have no more than 0.3% delta 9 THC by a dry weight, but it would have these other molecules. And that's really where, from this loophole, a very large market has emerged. And here from this, we're seeing a variety of cannabinoid products emerging onto the market. My team and I refer to the as hemp intoximers because these are isomers that are extracted from the plant or chemically created, as I described previously. And the examples are plentiful, and I have just a few up on the screen. And the products these are emerging in are flour, vapes, gummies, drinks, and all sorts of things. I put just a few examples of them in front of you, and they look a lot like products that are sold on the regulated market. on the recreational side, not necessarily the medical side. And you see their Delta 8 and Delta 9. And in fact, for the edibles, producers have gone a step further. And they are not just these Delta 8 THC or Delta 10 THC, they're putting in Delta 9 THC, diluting it with the other ingredients. And from there saying, hey, it's 5 milligrams of Delta 9 THC, but 5 milligrams is less than 0.3% of the total ingredients of this drink. And we see this market proliferating. So please don't hold me to these numbers or quote me on these numbers. These numbers in many ways are directional, but they give you a feeling of basically a greater than $100 billion cannabis and hemp market and annual market in the United States. And to be clear, they are multiple different markets often competing with themselves. And I, as an attorney who spends all of his time in this area over the last 2 years, have yet to go from wherever I was to a dispensary without passing a store that sells hemp or similar products. And that level of competition was unanticipated as well. And yet, the amount of illicit cannabis that's purchased still is greater than all of that put together. It's getting close. Don't hold me to that either. I mean, together, the legal markets in the United States might be equal, a little bit bigger than the illicit market right now, but the markets themselves are so volatile that it's hard to tell you exactly. And I'll give you one example of that on the marijuana side. Lots of people in Illinois who would purchase from legal places or purchase illegally would drive to Michigan because there was good marijuana there at a very low price. The Michigan government just put in an additional tax, and that completely changes the dynamic and completely changes the cost, which is passed to the consumer. So that action alone is going to raise the illicit market again. So government action on a daily or even weekly basis is moving. So I just saw a little change. I just want to make sure everyone can see my slides still. Okay, I think we're okay. So I'm going to show you 2 slides now. One is our map of the landscape of state regulated cannabis. And the next is going to be the same map of the United States, but for hemp at this point. And let me just pause for a comment here on the marijuana side. First for a drink of water and then a comment. You see, of course, our great state of Illinois in the middle of the map. In green, it is, I editorialize it as my Dartmouth green. So when I started, the United States was basically gray. You had California as medical, Oregon as medical, and Colorado as well. And that was it. The entire United States was gray, as we only have 2 states now. And it's quite amazing to me, as someone involved from gray to green, how much progress we've made. Yet at the same time, you'll see there are a lot of states that continue to have prohibition of marijuana. And I don't know, I mean, in some ways, we've made great progress. I started working on this the year after the iPhone hit the market. So I feel in comparison to the iPhone, I've made horrible progress. But we right now have medical cannabis in 40 states, adult use cannabis in 24 of those states, and a lot of states have kind of mamby-pamby laws.
Excuse me, Eric, can you put your slides back up again, because now they've disappeared for several
Oh no.
saying they can't see them. Could you
Yeah,
share?
I absolutely will. I'm
Thank
sorry
you.
about that. And I saw something was happening, but I wasn't.
Yeah,
I need to
it's,
now send a request to do that. So somehow my host was, I was removed. So let me try again, and no worries. And can you say, did you lose me before the
I had
US
lost
map?
you. I had lost you before everyone else was able to see you, but I had lost you. But I think
Can
we
you
can
see
see it
this
now.
now?
Yes.
And were you able to see the previous slide as well,
Um,
which is this, excuse me, this slide, the amount of the market? Well,
well,
I
no, I
spoke
think that's
about.
when I think that's when people lost it. Yeah. So
Oh,
go ahead.
great. Okay. Well, we're back on track then. Thank you very much. And please, anyone can speak up if there are any issues like that. But this will show you that this is the graphic for what I was describing as the multiple competing markets between state regulated or among state regulated hemp, excuse me, try again, state regulated cannabis, state regulated and taxed cannabis, hemp, and the kind of products that are competing with the cannabis marijuana products, and the fully here purple illicit market. I don't know why my marketing people made Denton's purple the illicit market. I think I'll have that changed, but that's what it is on this slide. And the next slide I want to show you is a landscape of the state regulated cannabis or marijuana. So this is not hemp, but this is showing that we now have 24 states that have fully uh, adult legal cannabis. Anyone 21 years or older can go into a dispensary and make a purchase. In some states, there's even home delivery. And we have, including those 24, 40 states that have fairly robust medical cannabis programs. And I was just commenting that really has been tremendous progress from when I started. This is the hemp THC beverage. So not even talking about edibles or flour or other things like that. This map shows states that have actually affirmatively permitted hemp-derived THC beverages. So those are the beverages like, let me just, because I'll show you another example of them coming up like this that are all available in a store in Minnesota, for example. And so this map just shows you the diversity of regulations around the hemp market. Um, right. So right now you have competing markets, and a lot of folks are saying, hey, we get to produce basically the same products that are from hemp, and they're not controlled illegal substances. We get to pay our taxes normally. There's not all the weird treatment that marijuana gets. We have less regulation, interstate commerce, often direct to consumer. And these are products that are often appealing, not always, but some like a 2.5 milligram drink are appealing to kind of the folks who might be hesitant to walk into the dispensary. Um, and so just going back to this, if I just showed you this alone, you'd say, hey, I think I'll do the hemp intoximers rather than everything that's difficult about legal marijuana. And for all the legal marijuana producers who have invested millions of dollars to build that industry and market, it quite frankly is a bit alarming that folks can go to market so much easier with hemp. On the consumer side, I'll just comment availability is good as long as it's done responsibly, but you also need to have safe products. And what we know right now is many of the products that are the so-called hemp products on the market are actually contain things that are not necessarily viewed as safe, even like heavy metals. While the state regulated market has tests for all those things. So if you go to the state regulated market, you know that you're getting product that's been tested, produced from ingredients that we know where they're coming from and all of that. I am not going to today give you an in-depth dissertation on the level of federal regulation. The point of this slide is to show you that now hemp and hemp extracts and hemp isomers and hemp products are regulated at various different levels. There's the FDA, who, by the way, promised but has failed to deliver on a legal pathway on CBD. So that still does not exist, or at least is unclear. And the FDA still has a role in lots of this, even though the FDA is not choosing to regulate at the state regulated level, right? So they're not involved in the products that are sold in the dispensaries, although they could be. The USDA now regulates hemp farming and really plays no role and has avoided a role with respect to anything that is after harvest. The FTC has issued some warning letters, usually in tandem with the FDA, and there's been select enforcement, particularly against products that are attractive to children, that look like products that are candies that are otherwise marketed, that no way could get to market in the state regulated cannabis market, but are able to get to market in hemp because there's less regulation. The DEA has really not gotten involved in hemp and has actually taken the position that, hey, if it's less than 0.3%, we're not really going to look at source rule. We're not going to look at what's happening in between. If the thing in front of us has less than 0.3% delta 9 THC, we'll treat it as hemp rather than the controlled substance marijuana. And that, by the way, applies to seeds as well. And that's just kind of a bonus fact for this. Seeds that are genetically engineered to become marijuana are deemed hemp. And you can just have them sitting there and you can sell them. And that's legal. It's just that once you plant them and it starts to express greater than 0.3% delta 9 THC, it converts to marijuana and is then illegal. And so the only point I want to make in addition on states is that there is a vast variation on how states are regulating hemp, as there is for marijuana, on the other hand. Different formats, different potency restrictions, age restrictions in most states, but not all. And then what cannabinoids can go to market. The different cannabinoids that are produced either naturally or chemically, and different states now are having different rules about that. Okay, I see. I hope everyone can still see the slides. I just wanted to make sure that they're still up there. The point of this slide and what I'm going to describe to you now is not to give you a chemical overview of hemp or all the operational effects of extraction and isolation. Be happy to come back and talk about that as well. But it's just to identify some of the risks that can arise in a typical production process. And so the first thing is pre-harvest testing. I mentioned delta 9 THC. So actually delta 9 THC comes in the biology from a different cannabinoid called CBG. CBG is kind of like the mother cannabinoid. And what CBGA actually produces is THCA. And so THCA is what is mostly and naturally in marijuana. If you eat THCA, it doesn't get you high because that acid blocks the THC from binding with our own endocannabinoids. So if you heat THCA, or quite frankly, just leave it over time, or use some pressure on it, the A will fall off very easily, and you'll have THC, which does bind with our endocannabinoid system and is an intoxicant for many folks, in addition to having other effects. So What's really critical here is lots of farmers went to market and are testing only for Delta 9 THC, but the Farm Bill, which birthed hemp, and the USDA specifically say you need to include THC in that calculation, which we refer to as decarboxylation. And in that decarboxylation, the calculation is 0.3% Delta 9 THC plus 87.7% of Delta 9 THCA, right? So it has to include the THCA, which many farmers don't, which is a whole nother issue. Hot extracts, that's when you're extracting from the plant using CO2 or heat or things like butane. And in that extract, THC rises above 0.3% of the dry weight basis. And that is referred to a work in progress when that gets higher than 0.3%. And let me be clear on why that part we view as legal. So Congress and the president signed into law saying hemp and hemp products can go to market. Well, as you know, as lawyers, an agency cannot interpret the law to basically nullify the law. And the only way that you can get extracts from hemp, including CBD, is, at least for a point in time, the very little bit of THC that's there is going to be higher because you're pulling out all the other things. It's just a matter of mathematics, really. And so we have argued, and it's generally been accepted, that at least at that point, the hot extracts are not illegal marijuana. They still remain hemp. As to what happens further down the process and whether that remains a work in progress or somewhere that extract becomes illegal marijuana has not entirely been clarified under law and is the loophole that has given rise to this multi-billion-dollar industry that we're discussing today. I mentioned earlier, these words are used in different ways, like synthetics, semi-synthetic, chemical conversion. Sometimes you can make a THC from something that is not originating from marijuana. That we think of as synthetic. I describe the conversion process when you have a barrels full of THC, excuse me, of CBD oil, and you're then converting that to THC. I'm not here to call that anything, whether that's semi-synthetic or conversion. I'm simply saying that states, through different language, have regulated those substances in different ways with a trend toward prohibition. The last thing I'll say in terms of the risks, and there are many more, but what I want to pinpoint for today is THCA flower. Our view is that when you go into a smoke shop or a convenience store and they're selling high THCA flower, you can look at the label and it has 0.25% Delta 9 THC and 30% Delta 9 THCA. Well, as best I know, chemically, biologically, everything else, you cannot get to that correct pre-harvest testing, including post-decarboxylation, and get to those kinds of figures on a product going to market. And so we generally advise clients that the THCA flower that is so-called hemp THC flower is not legal under federal law and under most state laws. I described very briefly the regulations so far and what they're hitting on, and I won't go through all of this just in the interest of time and leaving time for questions, but to say the direction is greater regulation. To the extent that states are not expressly prohibiting these kinds of products, they are generally choosing to regulate, but like marijuana, the states are regulating hemp all in different ways. The testing requirements differ. My team, we tried to come up with some sort of a universal label. I mean, there are companies selling these products in many different states. And the answer was we couldn't do it. We literally, or we could not come up with a label for example, 12 different states that complied with all of their law and got it all on there. And eventually we called states and said, can we do it this way and you won't enforce against us? And we worked it out, but it's still challenging. And the problem is that because of the low level of regulation, you have many folks going to market, many companies going to market, just ignoring the law, not labeling in the proper way, not testing in the proper way, sometimes even serving, or I should say, violating the potency restrictions by selling direct to consumer. And states have limited ability to go after those companies. I showed this earlier. I just wanted to give you a feel for what's going on in a state that has chosen to directly permit and regulate products that contain hemp-derived intoxicating isomers. And so Minnesota has set potency limits. It is said, like a state like Connecticut as well, exactly where these products can be sold, how you need to age gate at the point of sale. And in addition to all this, Minnesota has gone one step further than any other state, at least at this time. Other states are now permitting it, but they were the first to allow cannabis drinks to be sold socially in this way. Hemp drinks, right? These are hemp drinks with THC in them, and they are now sold in bars, and they can be on tap, which is the first state to do that. And there is a tremendous interest from the alcohol industry in the hemp-derived beverages. And this just shows you there's so many because the barriers to entry are fairly low, much lower than going into state-regulated marijuana. So there's so many products right now. Let me pause and talk a little bit about what's next, both on the federal side and then on the state side, and then we'll get to your questions, which I'm happy to answer. So Congress, by all accounts, accidentally created this loophole that has led to this multi-billion-dollar market. The great question is Congress going to continue that? And there is no agreement on that. And it is fiercely debated. So you have McConnell on the one hand saying, I don't want this to be my legacy. We need to close the loophole. This is producing products that are dangerous to children, attractive to children, and they give a whole litany of horribles. On the other hand, from the exact same state, the other senator, Rand Paul, says, oh, no, you don't. This is feeding farmers in my state. You're not going to take it away. And so we have strong debate on this, and the debate is not specifically on partisan lines, interestingly enough. And you have many folks who are working to close the loophole, not just close this loophole, but say no THC at all, which would be problematic because there are many health products like Charlotte's Web's CBD products on the market that contain trace amounts of THC. They're not getting anyone high, but they exist there. So no THC would do more than close the loophole. It would basically shut down the original purpose of hemp and the Farm Bill. I don't know what's going to happen. I can tell you what happened in Texas, where the attorney general and the lieutenant general of the state worked hard to get a bill passed that prohibited these kinds of products. The beverage industry, I mean the alcohol industry, and certain others, and I don't mean to finger just them by any means, right? They were just involved. Some were involved, others were involved. more on the Republican side, went to the Trump administration, which itself then went to Governor Abbott and got him to veto that bill. So on the one hand, I think, why won't the same thing happen at the federal side? On the other hand, who knows, right? We live in interesting times. And exactly what that fix will look like, I don't know. And I think there is a chance that this could get entirely shut down. And I think there's a chance that it doesn't and it continues to proliferate. On the state level, the direction is toward greater reform and in some cases actually enforcement. So there are many states that either have light regulations or no regulations that have not gone so far as to prohibit these products. And in some of those states, the attorney generals are acting, and they're acting where they can to say this product is not approved or it's attractive to children, and many of them are, and it's a problem. And going out and seizing products. So we see state attorney generals, local sheriffs doing that, state attorney generals bringing actions in states like Connecticut, Kansas, Nebraska, but not only that, right? I mean, there's a lot of consternation and hand wringing in Illinois about what to do with a large and growing hemp market. We see legislation, including legislation that is now looking to take any of the hemp products and put them only in the state regulated marijuana industry. And California is an example of that. And I know there's discussion in Illinois of potentially doing that. And then it's interesting what happens there is often they're carve outs, and the carve out is for beverages. Um, and we're seeing that either beverages or where these products can be sold in states like Missouri and possibly Ohio, which is happening as we speak. And that happens for two reasons. One, quite frankly, the marijuana companies don't sell a lot of beverages through dispensaries. That that whole distribution channel is really not set up for drinks, and the merchandising isn't great for drinks. I don't mean to say that as a blanket statement. I'm sure it's done well in places, but generally that's not how it was set up. And now you have distributors and alcohol retail establishments grappling with lower sales of beer. And so the wholesalers and the distributors and the retailers want to fill shelves, and these drinks provide an opportunity to do that. And quite frankly, their lobbying might is far greater than the lobbying might of the hemp industry and the cannabis industry put together. I mean, by far. So that's what we're seeing. I mentioned Illinois. I mean, it's like this is how things go, right? There's saying that we're going to have this done by mid September, and then it doesn't happen. You have representatives, and I'm not. No one's at fault here. I'm just saying that you have folks nearing an agreement, and then it doesn't happen. And Governor Pritzker is very frustrated with the proliferation of these products, often right next door to the state regulated industry that he's trying to support. I mentioned Texas. I mean, it's just been wild. And the bottom line is that Governor Abbott issued an executive order to institute emergency regulations to permit the industry to continue to have regulations around it, including, really most importantly, age gating. And so he ordered the Texas ABC to adopt emergency rules. And by the way, that bans certain consumable products like inhalables. So those are banned now in Texas, and we're talking more about drinks and edibles and the rules that are being put in place around those products. So that gets us pretty cleanly to 45 minutes, and I am welcome to take your questions on anything. And I can tell you that if you don't have questions, I can go back and talk about this forever. So please put them in the chat, and I will get to them. So is the California wine industry for or against the proliferation of hemp products? That is a great question. And I can tell you that I can't answer it monolithically, meaning I don't know that they are in one way at the General Assembly advocating in one direction or another. And I'm not sure about that. But I can speak from general experience. They, like many other industries, view hemp and the proliferation of these products with both trepidation and interest. When I say that, it can be within the same company, right? And you have these sales folks going hot to say, we need to get a THC wine on the market. And of course, that generally has to be done without alcohol. So you have to take out the alcohol, get THC in there, and you have the sales folks and certain elements really interested in that and concerned with how hemp products may eat market share for alcohol products and alcohol used in the broadest sense, beer and wine and spirits. And so there's concern, there is interest and a need to act competitively. And then there is trepidation on top of that because it's such an uncertain area, needing so much legal help on all aspects. I know wine companies that looked hard at this and a few that said, hey, we're not going to do this at this time. I have another client that is not in the wine industry. They are in the marijuana industry, and principals are forming a separate company for purposes of distributing wine in California and elsewhere. So I think the answer to your question is it remains to be seen as to how the California wine industry writ large responds to this. I hope that's helpful and happy, Alan, to answer any other questions. So it's Edward, excuse me. It's a great question. Um, so let me talk about hemp in Illinois because I really kind of was awfully quick with it. Um, as you probably know, the state government has not prohibited these kinds of hemp products, so they are sold in hemp standalone stores, wellness stores, convenience stores, gas stations, massage places. I mean, they are sold in all sorts of places that state regulated and taxed marijuana companies may not sell their product, including, by the way, in the loop, right? I mean, you have, and so this really makes the point, well, I think, that it's in Illinois, the sale of these products are not affected solely by the state regulation or lack of regulation, but often case on a local level, because local governments, some are themselves entering ordinances to prohibit the sale of these kinds of products. But many places don't. And it's proliferating. And I think I mentioned I've never gone to a dispensary in the last 2 years without passing a store that's selling these kinds of products in Illinois. So I can speak for the situation in Illinois with respect to how do different uh, stakeholders, if you will, look at this. And let's just take the beverages that exist. The alcohol industry is very interested in that. The hemp industry, whatever it is very interested in them. The marijuana industry is very concerned about them, but at this point saying it's probably here to stay, so we ought to find our own beverage and put it out there. So the marijuana companies are starting to look at the proliferation of those beverages, both as a risk, a competitive risk, and as an opportunity. And so they each are taking their own strategies around that. And I think that applies to the alcohol companies and everything else. And so at the end of the day, Alan, I think there's a chance that Pritzker enters an emergency executive order because I think he's concerned with the level of proliferation of these products. and the sale of these products to underage persons, and and the inability of the legislature, our General Assembly, to get it done. I could see that happening, but I think it's a very dynamic situation. And so the bottom line is hemp in the state of Illinois is permitted and not really regulated at this point. Oh, so let's talk, Mark, about social equity in hemp. It's a really complicated issue. Um, and I'll back up because we have a little bit of time to say, I started in this industry in 2008. There was no industry. So I started on trying to form an industry in 2008. And when I started, I mean, it's funny, it's a long time ago in the world of cannabis. And this information was not really available. And at the time I was at Jones Day. And I researched this the way, a good lawyer would who has some time, a pro bono project at a point. Is marijuana, does it have medicinal properties? I really had to do research that. My wife has a PhD in biology, so she helped me with that. And I was actually surprised by how much research there was available at that time that pointed to the fact that marijuana does have currently accepted medical uses in the United States and elsewhere. Uh, and I was, moved by that. And then I was so I've heard marijuana is not safe. I mean, I'd used it back when I was younger, but there was that, it's unsafe. And I researched that, and I mean, we're talking about months of research, and determined, as many people have, that marijuana has harms, and for certain genetically predisposed persons, it can be somewhat dangerous, but it has a really good safety profile. And it was only at that point that I said, well, hold on a second, why is marijuana illegal on this pretend basis? And I then understood the um, the racial component of this, and not just racial, but other folks, but how people of color have how this law has been used against people of color in the most pernicious way, and the war on drugs as a whole, and how those folks have been, and I mean folks directly affected by that, not using that in a pejorative way, folks directly affected by that, um, it can be life ruining. And I didn't set out for that aspect. I want to be honest. I set out on the medical aspect. I have Crohn's disease, and I had cancer in this, and I saw how effective cannabis can be for patients with certain ailments. And I wanted patients to have safe, legal, affordable access. But I also understand that the legalization of marijuana, um, the illegality was on the back of people of color for the most part. Um, and to be clear, I'm a daily cannabis user, and I have been for over 10 years. And I'm discreet. I use it as medicine, but I've never once been stopped by law enforcement, right? And had I not looked like this, I probably would somewhere along the line. And so state programs are working to address that disparity. And the state medical marijuana program is working to address that disparity. No one in hemp is working to address that disparity. And so there's a certain level of upset that products that are basically similar to the ones on the market, and often folks who are so-called social equity have gone through hell to get their license and get money and find a place to do this. And then all of a sudden, 2 blocks away or a block away, the hemp store pops up. There's tension about that. And I don't want anyone to interpret my comments as editorializing on that. I'm not trying to figure out what's right or wrong there. I'm merely acknowledging there has been unequal treatment. There are problems that arise from it. and that hemp serves as sort of a competitive foil to what some are trying to accomplish in the marijuana industry. But I will say this one thing as someone who's worked in the space a really long time. Marijuana is no more the solution to all our problems than it was the cause of all our problems. And um, while I want us to work on social equity, and I don't just want, I think we need to for our country to move forward, um, it can't be done entirely on the back of marijuana. It's too big just for marijuana, as are many things that are placed on the back of marijuana. And so it's a really difficult issue. And it's one that is really, in some ways, a remarkable demonstration of the laboratories of democracy as to how each state balances the different interests and the different risks and the different perceived risks that are involved with cannabis and marijuana as it goes to market. And sort of to summarize the point, the remarkable thing is each state goes to such pain to try to get that balanced. And then in many states, companies can just go to market with similar products derived from a hemp plant without any of those considerations being taken into consideration. And I don't say that as someone who's anti-hemp. I don't want my comments to be interpreted that way. I'm pointing out how different people view the market and the tensions that exist within that market. And I think with that, that answers the questions and brings us to a conclusion. Aviva, do you have any other? Oh, hold on. I'm sorry, Edward. Um, it's great. So, isn't that amazing? So, the question is, are there regulations that prohibit individuals who buy or use hemp products from possessing firearms? And the answer is no. That the law as it currently stands is that if you are a registered medical cannabis patient, you are not supposed to or not allowed, well, you're not allowed to get your FOIA card. People lie, but like if you're a medical cannabis patient, the government views you as not entitled to your Second Amendment rights. Again, I'm not editorializing, I'm just trying to show the tension here that hemp, it doesn't matter. As you know, for marijuana, it does matter. Now, the Supreme Court has granted cert on the very issue of marijuana and firearms. And the question is, so even if you are a daily marijuana user, does that mean that you carry that level of danger or poor judgment that you don't get your Second Amendment rights? And it's a terrible case for the Supreme Court to do it. And actually, I think the Supreme Court, here's a wild guess, took such a bad case because even in that bad case, they're going to say the facts don't matter. If the government has to do more to prove that a marijuana user does not get those Second Amendment rights. And so to answer your question, Edward, it doesn't matter on hemp. It matters entirely on marijuana in a way that no longer matches up with the fact that we have 24 states covering a majority of US citizens that permit marijuana, the legal sale of it. You have, I think it's now 15 to 17% of our population that use marijuana 4 times or more each year. And when you go down to monthly or even weekly, that number doesn't drop very much. And so you're talking about a large population that current law removes the right to firearms. To put that number in perspective, the number of folks I mentioned, like 4 times or more, that is equal to the US population age 65 years or older. That's basically like saying anyone 65 years or older is not allowed to purchase a firearm. I don't mean ideologically, I mean numerically, quantifiably. Um, and I'm a marijuana user because I use it medically and I can't get a firearm. And I can tell you that I use marijuana and use it in a responsible way and can practice law and practice law in a way that I'm recognized as one of the leading lawyers in my field. And I'm not impaired to do that, but the federal government has a broad sweeping rule that if you use marijuana, you can't have a firearm. Yet, if you use the uncontrolled substance, hemp, you're okay. So, Edward, great question. Thank you for that. And I hope that answers that. And I think that brings us to end of time. I do want to just thank you because no, I appreciate the Decalogue Society, and I appreciate you inviting me. And yeah, I'll just say it. Jews have had a really important role in the development of cannabinoid-based medicines in Israel and otherwhere, and protecting the liberty of patients to use cannabis. So this is all tied together, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. And I think I hand it back to you, Aviva.
Yes, thank you very much.